sang this song to me. There was a message in its melody, sweetest lyrics that I ever heard. There's a message in the songs of birds. Tomorrow is another day. Living is the only way tomorrow's gonna ever come. Listen to the words of the song. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything is gonna be
Greetings to everyone who is tuned in now and to everyone who will tune in later. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman. I'm the host of this A Sip of Inspiration podcast. And I want to thank you all for joining us. This is going to be an incredibly exciting podcast. I know I say that about all of them, but all of them are. And this one is no exception. So before we get started, you all know I have to do my housekeeping per my marketing manager. So go to champagneconnection.com. You'll see a lot of merchandise that you might be interested in. And also, each one of these podcasts can be seen there as well as on my YouTube channel. So with that being said, I want to thank Lara Jones for deciding to be one of my guests. She is the creator of the Global G.R.I.T system, and I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then I will turn it over for her. She has channeled her deep expertise and research into creating the Global G.R.I.T system. This innovative and tailored framework identifies the 4 pillars and types of grit, accompanied by the bespoke adoption process that transforms theory into action. She's also the author of Hunt or Be Hunted, and you can see a copy of her book that is sitting right next to her. So, Lara, tell us a little bit about you, and we're going to talk about this grit system because I think it is fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show and sharing your incredible audience with me today. You did a great intro. Obviously, I'm a keynote speaker and author of Hunt or Be Hunted, executive coach, and also the creator of many programs and workshops in relation to grit development. So that's actually what I'm known for, is a grit development expert and leadership performance expert. And I'll be perfectly honest, like, I didn't actually want to become the expert in grit, right? I mean, it's not like I woke up one day and thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be expert in grit. But it was through a series of incredible challenges that I faced in my life prior to moving actually out to America that really started to channel this deep grit within me. And it wasn't until 8 years ago that I actually decided to make the move from England over to America. And I said, you know what? I'm going to choose my own grit before grit chooses me again. Because when we decide to do that, it allows us to build the tools and put ourselves in difficult situations. So when difficult situations find us, we're better equipped to be able to handle them. And also I've got, quite a deep story as to how that evolved. And it was, 2.5 years ago now that I faced the unimaginable grit that no parent really wants to face. And my youngest son passed away, and I nearly lost my life the very same night. And so that completely changed the trajectory of my life. It changed the trajectory of my thinking. It just changed everything about what I had been thinking up until that point in terms of grit. And I can go into that in a little bit. But yes, it was a very tragic and traumatic time in my life where I didn't know how I was going to, what I call, grit through it. Right. And this is how the system started to be born. And I can go into that in a little bit later and educate the audience on how that became and how it was developed. But really, I want everyone to understand that we all have grit, right? We are born with it. We learn how to walk. We learn how to talk. And as babies, we completely know, like, it's something that's innate. We know what to do in certain situations. But as we grow, we're now not in maybe the same environment, or maybe we grow up in different environments. And therefore, the people that you're around, the environment that you put yourself in, and the people that you surround yourself with that's going to shape how gritty you really can be. And so grit is a muscle, right? Grit can be grown. It's like, if, I'm also an athlete, right? I'm a competitive athlete. I actually just came back from California competing in the World Series fitness competition. And so if I didn't go to my training sessions, then I wouldn't be able to be as strong as what I've been trained to be, right? And so grit is a muscle, and it works the same way. So we always want to make sure that we're pushing ourselves out of the comfort zone. And that doesn't mean putting yourselves in tragic situations or terrible, situations that you just really don't know how to navigate out of. It doesn't have to be as severe as what I've been through with losing a child. And there may be some listeners that may have experienced similar adversity. I'm talking about any type of adversity, no matter how major or how minor. You can grit through it, but you have to recognize, first of all, which type of grit you really need. Because everyone thinks grit is about, just go, push yourself, go, 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 which a big chunk of it is. But when my son passed away, I couldn't do that. I couldn't just pick myself back up and brush everything off and say, okay, let's just move on. That would have killed me. And so I realized that I had to start reframing how I thought about the situation. And if you notice, I said reframe, that's the R in my grit. So grit is an acronym that I've created to stand for get it done, reframe thinking, impact others, and take responsibility. And so therefore, when my son passed, like I said, I couldn't pull from the G in my grit. I had to learn how to harness the R in my grit. So I had to learn how to reframe the situation. And instead of saying, look what happened to me, I would say, look what revealed me. Or instead of saying, look what was taken from me, I'd say, look what was given to me. And I had a physiological response when I actually changed that wording. And I encourage anybody listening, no matter what challenge that you're facing, no matter how major or minor, just change one or two sentences with how you view the situation and see how it flips, and how psychologically that starts to have an impact on you with the approach that you take. And then in turn, the decisions that you then make. And it's okay to feel what you feel, but how you respond to those feelings is your choice. And that's very important for people to understand. I don't want you to try and push the feelings down. You got to acknowledge it and feel it. But how you choose to respond to it is 100% your choice, and you have control over that.
So how does this work in achieving your peak performance? Now, a lot of people have lots of different things that they need to, that were very painful or hard to overcome, and they're working to overcome those things. So what's one of the small tips you could share that will get them from just, I guess, wading in the water to deciding to jump in to the water?
Belief. You got to have belief in yourself. Most people will struggle with that because they think they have imposter syndrome, or they don't feel like they're good enough, or they feel like they don't deserve to be there. I mean, that's negative self-talk. And I actually talk about this in the book, that, in Hunt or Be Hunted, that 80% of our thoughts are actually negative and 90% are repetitive. So every day we're constantly battling these negative thoughts that are coming into our head, and then 90% are being repeated. So that's a big, tough challenge that you have on your hands day to day already. But as long as you're aware of that and you can acknowledge it, you then can say, thank you, but no thank you. You say, is this thought helping me? Is this thought serving me? And if it's not, you park it, right? You put it in a box and you put it on the shelf and you park it, and you reframe how you think about that particular situation. You see, most people, when it comes to peak performance, I will tell you this as well, especially as an athlete, most people don't do the foundation of what they need to be doing in order to unlock their true potential. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the book, I talk about it. It's in chapter 3. I call it the 5 pillars. Now, if you have a computer or a phone, what do you do when the battery starts to die? You charge it, right? You put it on the charger. Yeah, put it on the charger. And I will also say this. How many times have you dropped your phone?
Oh, thousands.
Probably. Right, yeah. Right. Now, would you do the same to your body? Would you deliberately, I'm not saying you deliberately drop your phone, but would you deliberately throw your body down on the ground?
No.
I'd hope not, right? My point being is, when we have equipment like a phone or a computer that we know we can replace at some point, we tend to be less careful with it. And it could be also subconscious, because you might say, well, no, I'm really careful with it. But what I'm trying to say is subconsciously, you know that at some point you can upgrade it. And so if you really damage it over time, you kind of come up with these excuses of saying, well, it's kind of, it's wearing down. It's time to replace it. All these phone companies out there try and put it in your head that you have to replace it after a year, or they have all these contracts and it makes you want to upgrade and so forth. Well, can you do that with your body? No. You have one body, right? So my point here is, in order for the software to work well on a computer and a phone, you have to charge it and you have to keep updating the software. And eventually you'll upgrade it, because you can abuse it by just dropping it, and sometimes it's an accident, right? You might drop something on it or whatever. But with our bodies, if we don't take care of our hardware, which is our physical self, how do we expect our software, which is our brain and our organs, right? How do we expect our brain to perform at optimum level? And so I have this debate many times with people. And as an executive coach, I actually teach this and train other executives on this. These are just the foundations, right? To even unlock that type of peak performance that we're talking about. The other side of it, like the mental thinking and the reframing and the grit system, that's even more advanced. But the foundations is where you need to follow those 5 pillars. And so, and actually, it's a fun thing I do when I'm speaking. I'm very aware that there's 3 different learning styles, right? We learn through vision, we learn through listening, and we also learn through practical skills. And so when I'm speaking on stage, or when I'm giving my workshops, or when I'm performing the programs, I have to make sure that all 3 learning styles are adhered to, because everybody learns in a different manner. And so therefore, I do something pretty fun when I'm speaking, and I get everybody to stand up. I do all these 5 pillars, and it's amazing to me that there's only very few people remaining standing at the end of this, and they typically are athletes. And when we talk about peak performance, we have to give our brains what it needs, right? It needs water, it needs good nutrition, it needs exercise. We need to have sunlight on us. We need to have sleep. That's such a big one. Executives really have a tough time. And even if you're not an executive and you're a team member, or you're an individual out there that is saying, well, I don't have time to sleep 8 hours. You don't have time to not sleep 8 hours, is my response to that. In other words, if you don't sleep for a minimum of 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep a night, you are doing yourself a disservice, because you will not perform at the level that you are capable of performing, because you're not giving your body the rest that it needs. If you expect your computer or your phone to run at peak performance when it's on 1, 2, 5%, it's not going to. So why are you doing that to your body, right? And so I have a lot of these discussions with people about just the foundation of how we can build our own grit within us to be able to push through difficult times. And see, most people think that grit is a grind and it's going to lead to burnout. That's not true. Grit doesn't lead to burnout. What leads to burnout is grit unchecked. So you have to check your grit using the 5 pillars, which I talk about in my book, Hunt or Be Hunted. And if you can navigate and ensure that you are hitting those 5 pillars on a daily basis, you will see the whole game change. I mean, I speak from experience because I do it, but I've also seen the transformation in others. And so we have to start with the basics first. Once we've kind of got the basics down and we understand, okay, we have to continue doing this to keep that basis there and build upon it. Now we can start tapping in to the very thought processes that we now have to start altering. And so that's where the grit system comes in, right? I mentioned earlier about that I'm a natural go-getter. I'm the G in grit. I love to get it done. I love to take action. I don't hesitate, because every action that you take, every inaction you take, it has consequences. And it's not about you, it's about others. And this is when I realized, after my son passed away, it was about 4 months later, and it was a Monday, and it was January of 2022. And I remember waking up in my son's room, and I looked in the mirror, and there was a window behind me, and the sunlight was streaming in, and it kind of bounced off the mirror and onto my face. And it was like a light bulb going off for me. All of a sudden, I just realized, and I said to myself as I stared into my own eyes in the mirror, and I said, you got to wake up today. Your son did not. You get to feel the sun on your skin today. Your son does not. Stop making this about you. This is not about you. It's about others. What are you going to do with everything that you've been through, all of this trauma, all of this grief, all of this pain? And how are you going to repurpose that to empower other people? Because this is not about you anymore. And it was really then that I started saying, well, how have I grit through these past few months? how have I managed to even navigate to this particular stage in my life? Well, that's when I realized I was pulling from the R in my grit, which was my reframing of thinking.
Okay.
When I started doing that, I realized that I was impacting others around me as well. So again, it wasn't about me, it was about others. And I had people watching me that I didn't even know were watching me because they were so inspired by what I was doing that they felt empowered to go out and do that very thing. Or they suddenly felt like, I can navigate this challenge now. So then I had to take responsibility to ensure that every decision that I made, every little move that I made, I had to say, how is this going to impact that person? How is this going to impact the audience? How is that going to impact others? So it's all interconnected, and all those letters that I just spelled out, that spells grit, right? So leadership is about getting it done, reframing how you think, impacting others, and taking responsibility. So that's G-R-I-T. So it's grit. So leadership is grit. You can't be a leader without it. And so if you, and I'm not just suggesting that anyone that's a leader has to harness this. Everybody should be harnessing this. Why? Because change is inevitable. We all face change, and we all have challenges, no matter how major or minor. You don't have to go through something as severe as what I've been through with losing my son and nearly my life to know that you're going to have challenges come your way. You need to understand how you're going to navigate those and say to yourself, okay, in this situation, do I pull from the G? Do I pull from the R? Do I pull from the I? Do I pull from the T? How do you know which one you are? Well, that's a story for another day, but that's something that I'm actually working on right now. It's about to be launched. It's called the Grit Type Indicator, and I've got that coming out as well. So there's a lot of interesting developments that I've discovered, and obviously I have, bachelor's in psychology. I've studied mental health counseling, and I'm trained in neuroscience. And so therefore I pull a lot from the cognitive sciences, and that has helped shape, because I understand the brain and how it operates and how it works. And so that has helped shape a lot of the global grit system, but a lot of it is my experience too, and putting what I've been through even prior to losing my son, like the grit that it took to come here with nothing. I mean, I built what I have today from nothing. And it was 8 years ago where, and I couldn't even eat for 3 days because I didn't have the money to. Now, most people, what would they do at that point? They'd run back to their comfort zone. But here's the thing. If you run back to your comfort zone, how are you growing? You're not. So if you stay in the fear zone and you freeze because you don't have the tools to get out of the fear zone, then you're going to burn out because it increases your anxiety, increases your stress. And then you kind of start spinning your wheels and you're not quite sure, well, I'm in the same boat. I don't know how to get out of this, but I kind of don't want to get out of it, but because I don't want to run back to comfort, but I don't know how to get out the other side. And so eventually you will burn out with that. So that's where you have to use the R and grit and reframe how you think about it. And that will get you into your learning zone. When you're in the learning zone, which is the big one that gets missed between fear and growth, and that's because society has a growing need for instant gratification. When you're in the learning zone, that's when you have to start to innovate, right? You have to start using what it is that you've been learning in a way that you can innovate your way out of challenges. So then they're not challenges anymore. They become opportunities. And that's when you're going to start to achieve the growth. And then when you've reached that level of growth, then it's your responsibility. You have to take ownership. You have to take responsibility to start that entire process all over again. And now your new growth zone is actually your new comfort zone. And the whole process starts again.
So what are some of the practical strategies or exercises you recommend your clients to build their grit over time? I know it would be different in every situation because it depends upon what's happening with that person. But what are some that people can take now and start to use to change their lives?
Well, in order to answer that, they'd have to hire me to come in and actually teach that, because that's not something that I can talk about in, a minute or two. That is, something that's very in depth. And of course, I have strategies for all of the different areas of grit. So the G, the R, the I, and the T. So that's when typically I'm hired to come in and keynote speak for an audience, or come in and give a workshop for, a couple of hours or half a day. Or, I have programs that actually teach you that and provide the strategies.
So if people wanted to have you do that, how will they contact you?
The best way to contact me is actually through LinkedIn. So if you type Lara Jones and then Grit Global, they can connect with me on there and message me. I also do have something I wanted to give away today for people. If they are interested more in the Global Grit system, they could text the word grit to 55444. And that will actually give them access to a Global Grit guide where I go over the system very briefly with a couple of different exercises on there. It's a very brief guide, but it gives you a bit of a taster into what to expect. And so that's one way. And like I said, LinkedIn is probably the best way to actually contact me. And they can also visit me on my website, larajones.com, and it's Lara, larajones.com. And they can go under executive coaching and book some time with me on the calendar as well. So there's multiple different ways of contacting me. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but LinkedIn typically is one of my bigger platforms where I obviously I post content every single day, and I give away, different ideas and different tools and some, inspiration and so forth. So if you ever feel this lack of inspiration or motivation, follow me on LinkedIn and you will see the various different topics that I talk about, and that will definitely give you a bit of motivation. I try to do it in the morning too, so it's the beginning of everyone's day, so it helps them, throughout the day.
That's great. So how do you tailor your coaching program to accommodate different personality traits or types? Because I know that's probably a big thing in what you have to do, because everyone is so incredibly different, as you mentioned.
Yes. So this is why I developed the grit type indicator. So I understand each level of grit and each type of personality very, very well. I'm actually highly educated in communication and emotional intelligence. I'm licensed in those two areas to teach specific programs as well. And so I understand the various different communication levels that people have. I understand the different grit types that I've created, that I've obviously done hundreds of hours of research in, creating an assessment as a result. And so I tailor my approach and the way I communicate with those individuals in that manner. But I'm very restrictive with the amount of individuals I take on. I don't take everybody on. I typically will do more team training and group training. Now I do individual training because, like I mentioned, I am an executive coach, but I limit my spots for that. So it's every quarter I kind of reopen some spots for that. So there'll be some openings coming up here shortly. If anyone did want to learn more about that, they certainly can. But yes, in terms of understanding their grit type and communication, I mean, I created that, so I know how to communicate with them in a manner that's going to suit them. Because at the end of the day, whatever I'm encoding, I have to make sure that they're decoding it in a way that they understand. Otherwise, it's just noise to them. So they have to be able to really fully understand and be on board. And very quickly, I can establish, are they a visual learner? Do they learn through listening, or are they more practical? So I do all three, and I kind of assess and I see where they really excel in, and then I tailor the program to them based on their learning style.
So is there one personality type or one grit type that you find that's more common than others?
Actually, no. There isn't one particular grit type that's more common than others. We're all one specific type of grit. We're more dominant in one area, but it doesn't mean that that's the only area of grit we can tap into. See, what I teach is I help develop all the other areas of grit. So then you know how to tap into those other areas. Like I said, when my son passed, I'm the G in grit. I couldn't pull from my G. I absolutely could not. I had to pull from the R in grit, and I had to learn how to do that. It's very difficult to reframe a situation when you've got something so tragic that's happened. Now, in a business setting, if there's conflicts in the team, how do you navigate through that? Well, I want to know how many are G's, how many are R's, how many are I's, how many are T's. And so once I understand that, I'm able to communicate with them in a way that they can resonate, and therefore we can start to resolve the conflict. Because oftentimes, why does conflict occur? Because there's a lack of communication, right? Or the communication has been put in a way that the other person may have become offended by it, even though the person that's saying it may not have meant to offend, right? So it's oftentimes whenever there's any type of change or challenges, it always comes down to communication. So if you can master that and understand how to communicate with the different grit types, then you can master business. Because if you don't understand people, you don't understand business.
So when you think of people who've had traumatic experiences, like you lost your son, what about, for instance, someone who was homeless and lost their son too? How would they fit in the program?
I mean, I've been homeless before. When I came to America, I didn't have any money and I had to go without food for 3 days. So I had a roof over my head, but then there was a point where I didn't have a roof over my head and didn't know where to go. I ended up sleeping on people's couches, but that was a tough time. I think that you've got to question to yourself, well, how did you get there? Right? And why? Why did you get there? That's the biggest thing. I chose to put myself in that situation. I could have gone back to England and walked into a very healthy salary. I chose not to because that wasn't the life I wanted back in England. I wanted to chase my American dream and prove to anyone that you really can do anything you want to do if you put your mind to it. And the biggest thing is never giving up. And it's tough for people when they get to that situation. If you were homeless and you'd lost a child, I mean, I've never come across both in one go. I typically work with teams and businesses versus individuals in their personal life. I'm not a life coach, I'm a business coach. So I that's the realm that I focus on. But if there was someone in business that had gone through traumatic times, that had been homeless and lost a child, I would help them reframe their situation. Now, if they were homeless, they probably wouldn't be speaking with me because I wouldn't know of them, right? Because I work with
Right.
businesses, so that's a difficult one for me to answer.
So, are there any specific tools or assessments that you use to evaluate a client's profile, their grit profile?
Yes, my grit type indicator that I created, which is my own IP and it's my own assessment. So yes, I use that on people to really assess it's not a personality assessment. It assesses how gritty they are in situations.
And I know that people can be in multiple places. We talked about that. You've got a G, a R, an I, and a T sort of always going on. Where do you find leaders easier to actually work with on your grit system? So is one easier than the other one?
No, is the answer to that. There's not one particular grit type that's easier to work with than another. I'm a G, so I get on very well with Gs naturally, but that doesn't mean I don't get on with an R, an I, or a T either, because I'm actually also very high I. I'm a big innovator as well. But I understand all of the grit types, so I'm able to communicate with them in a way that they understand. So there really isn't one grit type that's easier to work with than another. It's just a matter of understanding how to communicate with them in a way that they can resonate and that it sticks with them.
Your book, Hunt or Be Hunted. What made you decide to write that book, and who can be helped by reading it?
So Hunt or Be Hunted is all about my global grit system, and it teaches you the actual grit system. So it talks you through the process of what you need to adopt in order to develop all of the different grit types. It gives you an overview of the go-getter, the reframer, the innovator, and the trustworthy titan. I've got separate chapters on all 4 of those areas. And what inspired me to write the book was because I lost my son and nearly lost my life. So because of that, it changed the trajectory of everything. And I realized that if I can go through some really tough times in my life, and also prior to moving out to America, I went through some very, very difficult times, which you can read about in chapter 2 of my book. But I've gone through some pretty horrific situations in my life that most people probably would never go through in an entire life. And I went through that in a very short space of time. But if I realized that if I can navigate through that and apply my grit system that I started to realize that I had, that I didn't know I had at the time, but I was even following it, even though I didn't realize that I had it. But I started to reverse engineer how I was gritting through a lot of things. And so that inspired me. I thought, this has helped save my life. This has helped change my life. This has helped change so many other people's lives with what I'm doing. I have to write about it so I can get it out to a huge number of people and help change their thinking. And I know that, and it's not just in businesses that this has helped. I've even had random people actually come up to me once they've realized who I was. They've said, oh my gosh, your book has changed my life. And that's no joke. I mean, I've had people say that to me, and I've asked, like, what do you mean? I've even had 19, 20-year-olds read it, and they said, because of you, I changed my, someone said, because of you, I changed my course at university, and now I'm focused on leadership, and your book inspired me to do that. You made me help believe in myself. And so the book is about really understanding how to develop your own grit in you, and also how to develop it in others, and how to communicate with others who are of different grit types to you. You see, the biggest thing is we have to understand and have the self-belief that we all have grit. Every single one of us has grit. We just have different levels of it. The sooner that we understand that, the sooner we can get on and start communicating in a much more positive manner. Instead of, remember what I said earlier about battling those negative thoughts and having those repetitive thoughts, we have to be aware that that's happening, but make sure you're replacing that with something positive. And over time, your brain starts to rewire itself. You see, what creates the belief in people? Because the belief helps with motivation, but what creates the belief? You have to put yourself in an environment in which you have the autonomy to learn in the way that you want to. You have to put yourself in that situation. So that's what I was saying when I moved 8 years ago. I chose my own grit. I put myself in a situation where I could learn, and I would understand the hardship of what it takes to be successful. Because to achieve peak performance, you are going to have failures. I encourage you to have failures, because how do you learn? You learn from those failures, and you learn, okay, every time you have a failure, you're going to learn how to reframe that particular thought and how to adapt it and change it in a way that's now going to help you propel. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there, because sometimes even when we think, oh, we're nearly there, something else comes in, some other type of adversity. Yeah. So the journey to that success, that path can be very windy, right? And that's okay, because actually the journey itself is what's more important than actually reaching the goal, reaching the end goal. Because once you're there, remember I told you about the comfort, the fear, the learning, and the growth. Well, once you get there, then what? You've got to start that again. So what's the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing? So it's a continual process, right? That you should absolutely adopt and make sure that you're consistently harnessing and challenging in yourself. Because how do you expect yourself to achieve peak performance if you don't even understand the basics? And that's what I was talking about with the 5 pillars.
So what are some of the common challenges that your clients have and you're trying to help them develop? So what are some common ones? I know people watching this podcast, probably they're thinking, okay, so how does this affect me? Do you see this? Because I know, as you said, people have them. We all have them. We all need to deal with them. But people who are watching now are probably thinking, well, what are some of the common challenges? Or maybe what do I need to start thinking about?
Most common is actually 3, right? But it's fear of failure, fear of imperfection, and fear of the unknown. Those are the top 3 that I see consistently. And it's definitely not uncommon for whether I'm speaking in front of 1,000 people, or if it's 50 people, right? When I'm speaking, or when I'm giving the workshops, or even in the programs, I come across it all the time. And I will say this, that is it, when you think of fear of failure, if you consistently go around thinking, I'm not going to do that because I have this fear of failure. Well, let me tell you, by not doing it, you've guaranteed failure. By doing it, you're taking a risk, but you might just succeed. Yes. So what's better? Is it better to just not do it at all and guarantee failure? Or is it better to take a risk and maybe have the possibility of success?
So, but I've run into people who are actually afraid of being successful. So what do you do with those people?
Well, I'd have to ask them, why are you afraid of being successful? What is it about success that scares you? And then I say, why do you do what you do? Is it for money? Is it for the title? Is it to impact others? And I'm very curious, when people have a fear of success, it often, I really am curious as to why. So I'd have to really delve deep and start to sort of peel back that onion, if you will, and understand what it is, like how do they value success, how do they see success, what does success look like for them? Because success to some could mean money, success to others could mean healthy relationships, success to others could be waking up that day. So it's success is very different to a lot of different people.
And that is true. That is so true. So what role does goal setting play an important role in all of this? Because I know, excuse me, I know goal setting is that's a big term that means a lot of things. But people set goals, and as you said, sometimes they don't move toward them, or they do. So did they set the wrong goals for themselves, or do they need to look at what they really need to be working toward? Because I think that a lot of people just don't know how to get started, especially in the simple things as setting goals.
Mm-hmm. I love this question, actually. So when it comes to goal setting, I don't think there's any such thing as setting the wrong goal. If someone's set a goal, then it means that's really what they're trying to achieve. Where the problems start to lay is somebody has a goal and they have this vision, but they don't know how to get there. And so you've got to break it down and you say, okay, what are the tasks they have to do week to week or day to day in order to get to that goal, right? So what are the smaller tasks I have to do on a daily basis or a weekly basis in order to do that? Once you've identified what the tasks are, in order to carry out those tasks, we have to take another step back and say, well, what are our habits in order to be able to carry out those tasks? And it's not just about identifying what the good tasks are, but also identifying what the bad tasks are. The good habits and the bad habits, because we have to eliminate those bad habits out of our daily life. Now, there's a very clever way of how I do that, and I teach people that. That's part of, if they have coaching with me, I actually teach them how they can do that. But it really is transformational. I've seen it happen in others, and I can create those good habits in people. I can eliminate the bad habits. When you start to master that, you start to then be able to carry out the tasks you need to do. And then slowly but surely, you're putting one foot in front of the other, and you're slowly working towards that goal. And be realistic about when you're able to achieve that goal. Is it a month time? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 3 years? Is it 6 years? Whatever that time frame is, you don't know how long it's going to take you until you start breaking it down into tasks and then the habits that you need to carry out in order to eventually achieve that vision that you have.
And one of my questions was going to be also, do people quit before they before they reach their goal because they think it's taking too long?
Most people do. Yes, absolutely they do. And that's where I said, there's a big gap between fear and growth, and it's called the learning zone. That's where most people, they don't reach that because we have as a society this growing need for instant gratification. And so people just expect things to be now. We're kind of in that society. It doesn't work like that. We're human beings. We have brains, and it takes time to rewire them. And so therefore, if you really want to achieve something, you've got to have consistency, discipline, and focus. You cannot get away from that. Now, some people have this negative connotation. Again, I talk about this in the book. I believe it's in chapter 3 of the book. They have this negative connotation towards discipline because as children, we've learned to grow up with that word meaning negative things. And so therefore, I challenge you to replace that word with excellence, because it means the same thing, really, because to achieve excellence, you've got to have discipline. But just change the word and see how it makes you feel, see what the physiological response is to that. We have feelings as human beings, no matter how much people want to ignore that fact and say, no, we just need to be logical like computers. We are not. But here's the thing. Most people think that emotions can get in the way of where they want to be. Not if you use them correctly, right? If you reframe those emotions, they can be an incredibly powerful tool to get you to where you need to be. Look at what I've gone through. I have been able to harness all of those emotions and repurpose them in a way that I now use as a fuel instead of eating me up, right?
That's true. So when we set these goals, and then there's a challenge we just talked about, sometimes people, as you said, sometimes they need to change their goals, but sometimes people don't feel comfortable with that. So do you give them permission? I mean, because you learn new information all along the way. So should people be comfortable in maybe adjusting and changing their goals as they get more information about what it is they want? What about, because sometimes they find out they don't really want that, they want something else, but they don't,
Right.
but they don't give
There's,
themselves permission. So how do you handle that?
I would say there's two different answers here, because I feel like there's two different questions within
Okay.
that. Because with the goal, if someone wants to change a goal because they're just not achieving it, I wouldn't encourage them to change the goal. I would start assessing what are the tasks that they're doing. Like, what are they doing every day to get them to where they need to be tomorrow? That's often where the problem lays, and it comes down to habits. So that's one part of it. The other part, and I'm going to give you an example. So I mentioned I'm a competitive athlete, and I sustained some injuries towards the end of last year, and then I became pretty sick. I was sick fairly often. I mean, I travel a lot as well, so it was, and I have little children, so it was bound to be inevitable, really, that was going to happen. As a result, I wasn't able to train in the same way that I wanted to. Now, my doctor recommended I pull out of the competition altogether. She's like, and I said, well, no, that's a goal of mine. I'm not going to pull out of that. And she gave me the advice, and it was my choice with what to do. So instead of just giving up, right, and saying, no, I'm just going to pull out completely, I reframed it and said, well, what are the other options? So instead of doing a singles, because I enter as a pro athlete, instead of doing the singles, why don't I enter into the doubles? It gives my body, 20, 30 seconds rest every now and then, which is enough time for me to bring my heart rate back down. Maybe some of the training I do can be lessened slightly, to help my body get out of that get out of the sympathetic nervous system, get it into the parasympathetic nervous system. So my body isn't always in fight or flight, right? And so I just looked at it differently and said, a goal of mine was to compete in the competition. I had injuries, I had sickness, and I wasn't able to train as much because of all my travel. So what did that mean to my goal? Well, it just meant I had to reframe how I was going to achieve that goal. I still got to compete. I just didn't do it in singles. I did it in doubles. Do you see how I just changed that? Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily about changing your goal. It's about changing the path to that goal.
So how do your clients recognize and celebrate their progress along this journey? So do they get to celebrate?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that's actually a very, very important point, that we have to celebrate our success, because if we don't, we can start to lose the motivation, because it can feel like we're constantly working towards it, but we don't actually recognize how far we've come. I always encourage my clients to look back and say, look where I've come. Look how far I've come. I even do it for myself. I look back and say, look where I was a year ago. Look where I was 5 years ago. Look where I was 10 years ago. Look at what you've achieved in such a short space of time. And how did you get there? Well, we didn't do it alone. No one does it alone. I always encourage people, have a mentor, have a coach, have the right people around you to help inspire you and motivate you, and celebrate your success. If you don't celebrate it, no one else is going to celebrate it for you, right? So you have to be your biggest motivator in order to do that. And when you do that and you celebrate the success, you want more of it. And you say, okay, this has encouraged me. This is motivating for me. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing more and more of this in order to be even more successful. And it creates those endorphins in you, where you're just like, oh my gosh, this feels good, right? And so you want to keep going.
So what do you find most fulfilling in helping individuals and guiding them toward developing their grit?
I would help guide them towards their grit by, obviously, I encourage them to take the grit type indicator. And it depends if I'm working on them on an individual basis or if I'm working in a team setting. But I basically want them to understand the foundations of grit, number one. Like that they've got to start with the foundations. I want them to be doing the 5 pillars, right? They need to understand and have the belief that everybody has grit. And then I teach them the 4 different types. I teach them the communication styles. I teach them how they can communicate with others, with those other grit types. I teach them, the emotional intelligence piece of it, and how we can harness those emotions in a powerful, positive way, and how we reframe the negative thoughts, and how we deal with all those repetitive thoughts. I teach them discipline, teach them confidence. I teach them the belief in them, and in turn that gives them the motivation, which helps influence how they think. And when you can influence how someone thinks, it actually alters their brain processes. And when you alter the brain processes, it helps adopt a growth mindset, which is what you need in order to continue growing. When you adopt a growth mindset, you're now able to apply the very thing of what you're trying to learn in the first place.
So your book, Hunt or Be Hunted. So you did mention earlier that all age groups have found it very helpful. So remind us where we can find it again, because it's a great book.
Yes, thank you. Hunt or Be Hunted, How Anyone Can Develop Grit and Lead Like a Legend. That's the title of the book, and it's available on Amazon. It doesn't matter whether you're in America or outside of America, it's available on Amazon worldwide. So if you type Hunt or Be Hunted into the Amazon browser and put Lara Jones, Lara, Lara Jones next to it, the book will come up. It's currently available in hardback, paperback, and also Kindle. I'm actually working on an Audible version, but that won't be out for quite some time, probably not till next year. But grab a copy now. And I actually encourage people to buy the hardback or paperback anyway, because then you can write notes. I've had a lot of people, especially senior execs, reach out to me and say, I have written all over your book everywhere, and I've highlighted and I've put sticky notes in, and they've reread it. So I think it's better, in paperback or hardback, so you can actually make those notes. But yes, Amazon is where it's available. So I really do encourage you to buy a copy. It's not very much to purchase one, but I just go ahead and do it, because it could just spark that one particular thought process that might have been blocking what it is that you've been wanting to achieve. And so therefore, if you've got, and I'm going to challenge everyone actually that's listening, I want you to write down one thing of what you feel like you should be doing that you're not doing, that you know you need to be doing, right? Write down that one thing that you know you should be doing that you're not doing. And then if you text GRIT to 55444, you'll receive my Global Grit Accountability Guide, which will help you navigate how you go about doing that. So it's a very brief guide. And then if people are interested to learn more, obviously reach out to me on LinkedIn, go to larajones.com, and you can book some time on my calendar to actually speak with me one-on-one about working with me. So whether it's coaching one-on-one or you want me to come in and teach a team, that's what I do.
Okay, so I want everyone to be sure that you get this book, because this is an exciting, and this is just exciting for me. It will help you reach your goals. And we talk about reaching our goals and doing the things that we believe that we were sent here to do. And as I always say, we know that I believe that there's so many things happening that's wrong in the world is because the rest of us aren't doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, because
Right.
we don't know how, or we were afraid, or
Yep.
we got stuck. And
Yep.
as Lara said, she works with people who get stuck, and she has a process that will help us move forward. So my final question would be, how do you envision the future of grit-based coaching, and what innovations or developments do you see on the horizon in the future in this field?
Well, my mission is to ensure that I can activate a huge set of people with their grit. So in other words, I want to activate grit leaders, right? People that actually want to use their grit to help teach that to others. So it acts as a domino effect. But I want grit activated leaders is what I really want, because it starts at the top, and that's true for the next generation too, right? It starts with the parenting, it starts with the people that they're around, and it doesn't matter how young or how old somebody is. It really doesn't matter. You can change your thought process up until the day you die. Like there's a myth around that says that, by the age of 25, that's it, you're developed, you can't change your thinking. Is absolute rubbish. Like, you can absolutely rewire your thinking and your approach and your attitude and how you take challenges on, but it does start with the belief. And that's why you have to put yourself in an environment in which it gives you the autonomy to learn in the way that you want to. And that starts with hiring a good coach. It starts with having mentorship. It starts with the people that you surround yourself with. Surround yourself with people that have done more than you, that are better at you than things. Because when you identify your own strengths and your weaknesses, focus on building those strengths, right? Because grit's a muscle. Keep building on those strengths. And with the weaknesses, you'll learn in time how to enhance them, but also identify other people that are stronger in the areas where you're weak, because you can pull from that, right? You can use that in your own work. So, like I said, my vision and mission for Grit is, I'm the first person to ever develop and create a system for anyone to develop grit. So there's a lot of people that talk about grit, but no one's actually talking about how you develop grit, because a lot of people think that you can't, and you either have it or you don't. That's just not true. We all have it. We have different levels of grit, and it depends on what environment you're in, what environment you choose to put yourself in, right? Get out of the comfort, rip the comfort blanket away, rip it away, just like I did. Don't give yourself a plan B. There's only plan A. And when you do that, you will gain the confidence to do what it is you're trying to do. And if you get stuck and you feel like you're spinning your wheels, reframe it. Start using the I, start innovating, right? Start thinking outside the box, think differently. And if you're not sure how, surround yourself with people that do know how. Coaches, mentors, other people that friends, right? That maybe have done more than you in that area. I cannot stress enough how important it is to build relationships. The most important currency is not money. It's not even time. And that's coming from someone that nearly lost their life. I will tell you that the most important currency is relationships. It's people. If you understand relationships and how to build them, and you understand people, and you don't make it about yourself, you make it about others, and you offer to help other people because it's the right thing to do, then money will come, right? But don't focus on that, right? The time that you will gain as a result of building those relationships is incredible. I focus on people. I focus on building those relationships with others because I value people's time, and I value their like what they bring to the table. So, and I respect people too. And so when you have all three of those and you combine it together, you will have transformation.
I want to thank you for this. I've learned a lot doing this podcast. I've got more notes than you think possible. Thank you for sharing your background, because a lot of people who follow me have had the same experience as you. So thank you for that. Thank you for letting us know and see that it is just possible for us to be able to achieve our goals. And there's a system that will help us do this. So I want to thank you for being here today. And before we close, I want you guys to be sure now, go out to Amazon. The book is Hunt or Be Hunted, and text GRIT, which is G-R-I-T, to 55444. And be sure you start there. But I want everyone listening to get started somewhere, because I do believe that as we get started living the lives that we were created to live, the lives that this big universe is still waiting for us to claim, we could make this world so much better. Not to mention our lives, but the lives of others too. So with that, I want to remind you guys to may this day offer you just what you need in each unfolding moment. Be inspired, and until further notice, I want you to celebrate everything. Do not go gently into that good night, but I want you to find a heel worth dying for and take it. Be the person that you are waiting for, and make today so jealous that today so awesome that yesterday gets jealous. And above all else, I want you to do it your way. As I always say, I can do anything with the right pair of shoes. So thank you guys for listening. Laura, thank you for being here with us tonight and sharing this incredibly important information and the process in which we can use to change our lives and be the best that we were sent here to be, the best that we crave to be. Some of us just don't know how to do it. So thank you for that very much. So with that, I'm going to say good night to all. If you have questions for Laura, you can send them to me, or you can send them to Laura. As she has said, give us your website again.
Well, the best way to reach me is actually LinkedIn. So connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Lara Jones, but the website's larajones.com. There's no U, it's just LARAJONES. So larajones.com. Or like I said, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and you can connect with me on there and message me on LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you very much. And for this, you guys go have a great day. Bye now.
Life's too short to drink cheap champagne, so I decided to buy me a better brand to taste with my strawberry